Perspective Shift is brought to you by fdailycoaching.com. If you're seeking assistance to help navigate you through a difficult time or feel challenged to reach your full potential, Frank Daly can guide you to a perspective that will allow you to utilize your imagination and experience a more fulfilling and satisfying life. Frank has been working with people for over 20 years as a coach, helping them understand the power they have to transform their lives.
Welcome to Perspective Shift.
And we're back on this beautiful Monday morning. How we doing, Frank?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How you doing, man?
I'm great.
What's going on, Mike?
Good, doing real well. Very exciting this last week, jumping into our special guest that we have today. It was very cool researching him.
Yeah, so we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about Dean Radin's material. He's a scientist. And what he's doing is noetic science, and it's a study of like mystical phenomenon.
Is that what noetic means?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was the name of the institute.
No, it's kind of a study of mystical or magic, if you will.
I love
so
it.
It's in a science. So he takes it to a science level. He's a scientist by trade. And so, and it's interesting because there's not too many people. Well, actually, there's more and more now studying this stuff, but he's really going deep into studying. And I believe in the beginning, when he first went down this road, he wanted to see what it was all about, like what we call magic and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he was somewhat skeptical. But I think, hey, whenever I go into something and look into it, I have that skepticism because I don't want to just buy into it.
Skepticism is healthy.
Well, you want to get beyond the point of skepticism. It's good because, hey, if you're going into a field or something like that and you have interest in it, skepticism allows you to say, okay, what part of this is the truth and what part of it is just we're making up a story. Because even within science, we have to make up a story to get us to a place to where, okay, what about this? And that's what scientists, what about this makes this, or why is it happening this way? And there's a lot of things out there where science is, they're at a place where they know correlations, but they don't know the causation of it. Yeah. And maybe as we get into this noetic science or studying more within the understanding of quantum physics, we'll get deeper into these causations. Where with classic physics, you can see what was happening on the outside world. I pick something, I drop it, I could do trajectory. Because of classic physics, we can fly planes and stuff like that. But why? Why was that? And people are like, well, this is the way it is. Well, with studying deeper into this, like noetic science, that Dr. Dean Radin's doing, we might get closer. And one of the reasons, like, people are like, well, why study this? Why get into this? Because a lot of times I feel like we're told we're doing something wrong or it's supposed to be this way. But we're told by people that don't have the whole picture. And I find that very interesting because, years ago I would learn something and it worked for me. And it worked for me in a moment. Some things were longer moments, so to speak. Then I thought, like, if everyone did this, their life would be better. So I became that annoying person. Yeah.
Got to try this.
Got to try this. Well, if you just did this, And, but there seems to be a strong correlation that he's finding out, especially in the field of understanding of meditation. But again, there's many forms of meditation that would come about. And that's one of his practices that he uses. I think he started way back when TM first hit this country. Yep. He started doing that. So
I'm excited because, like, through the research, so a little background, born in 1952, Dean Radin, he's a scientist, like Frank was saying. He's a researcher. He's done a lot of cool stuff. He's done work, when he spent time at Princeton, Stanford. He's worked on the U.S. government, different research for the U.S. government. And it's all this parapsychological, am I pronouncing that right? Parapsychology or parapsychology.
So, yeah.
I had to write that one down, but I was looking at it and I looked up what parapsychology was. So what parapsychology is it's the study of psychic phenomena. And I thought that was a very cool direction for a scientist to take, because this is not something most researchers or scientists jump into or delve into. And so I thought that was kind of a good starting point. But you'll hear him reference different studies, his own work, the stuff he's done in his lab. So it's just a great way to watch science and the mystical mesh. We've been, hearing these different stories, parables, etc. for thousands of years. And now science is coming to a point where it's beginning to support things we have been told for millennia.
Yeah, and mainly due to the understanding of quantum physics, which studies.
And I've got a video clip of him talking about quantum physics.
So so it's not that like in the past, because hey, when I do a self-inquiry myself, I have to take in consideration everything I'm experiencing, right? And if someone's trying to push an experience on me that I haven't met, I'm not going to push it away, because I believe, okay, they're in front of me for me to have this experience, kind of how it works. But I don't fully buy into their definition of it. I need to create my own. And I think that's what Here in Perspective Shift's about. It's kind of like, come to be your own scientist. Now, someone like Dean Radin, Dr. Dean Radin, will actually help you along how to use deductive reasoning and stuff like that. But again, if we buy into too much stuff, you end up in a cult, or it moves away from the direction in which your life is heading. So it can actually make you mad.
Yeah.
Crazy, if you will. So, everything you hear on our show, or everything you hear anywhere, and most great teachers always say is, don't take their word for it, but look into it, because when you start looking into it and you apply it, how it makes your life better. It's not that, okay, I can manifest a bigger house, or I always tell people, I'm like, if you finally get to the point where humans can start walking on water and you don't overcome your shit, you're just going to bitch that your shoes are wet.
Yeah.
So I don't need to master what we call like the phenomenon of, manifestation, getting everything I want. It's not about that. It's about the state I'm in at all times, a peaceful state, because that's who we are. And when we block out these ideas, like if we forget we are peace, we are happiness, we are love, it's just different ways of saying it. When it seemingly disappears, you think there's this oscillating or duality. There really isn't. It's just that, like, again, if you were to blindfold over your eyes, the light didn't disappear. You just blocked it tremendously by putting a blindfold over your eyes. So once you release that, so when you come from that basis, going into studying this stuff becomes fun. Just like a child playing in the playground or rummaging through the woods, it becomes fun. But they're not doing it for anything. But I see a lot of people out there, and I was one of them, that was studying all this stuff, trying to, make my life better. I would go to a meditation retreat to get better, and I'm like, no, it was just an experience. Mm-hmm. And in that, what happens, your life starts to get better, But I wasn't doing it for that. When I kind of get off of that treadmill, all of a sudden I do stuff for the experience. And all of a sudden you could see, as the story plays out, your life seems to move easier, but that's not why I did it. But in the same time, you start to see it become better, because I'm not worried. And why it's better? Because I didn't feel like I had to do it. Because if it didn't come out exactly the way I did, I didn't study hard enough, I'm not smart enough. I'm like, no, you only experience what you experience. But yet having these new experiences bring you into this present moment. So stay present with these ideas and concepts and see where it takes you.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we got a few good clips for you guys today. I say we jump right in with our first one. So this one's Dean Radin, and this is him talking about synchronicity.
This was back in 2000 when I had just left Interval Research, which was Paul Allen's laboratory for inventing the future of the internet. Paul Allen was the co-founder of Microsoft. So I worked there for 2 years, and then my contract there ran out. And with several people from Interval, we decided to start a new nonprofit that we call the Boundary Institute, to study the boundaries between mind and matter. So this was right in the middle of the .com craze, and it was hard to find office space in and around Silicon Valley. So we were starting to go out to the periphery, and we found a place in Los Altos, which is in Silicon Valley, but sort of the suburb. And it was an office park that had a wide variety of professional services of all kinds. So we found a spot and we rented that. And for a number of months, I was the only one in there because I was setting it up and we didn't have that much money yet. And so we had 5 or 6 rooms and all of them were empty except my office. My office was abutting the wall of the people next door. I was lived close enough to be able to walk to work, and I always walked a certain way that bypassed everyone else. So I was able to go immediately right to our office. So one day I decided I think I'll walk a different way. I started walking to see who our neighbors were in this office complex. And it was real estates and dentists and things like that. And then I walked past a place that said PsyQuest Inc. And I thought, oh, that's a funny coincidence because Psy was spelled PSI, Psy, and then Quest, capital Q. I thought, well, that must be like Personnel Services Incorporated or something like that. And one of these days I'll introduce myself and just find out what they do. And then as I walk around the corner and I'm heading towards our office, I noticed that there's right next to us, our neighbor is PsyQuest Labs. And so now I'm much more interested because what is Personnel Services doing with a laboratory? And it's right next to us. So I look in the door and it has mini blinds and you can't really see very well in there, but there's no one in there. There's a reception area, but there's no one there. So every day over the next month or so, I walked that way so I could see if someone was in there. I wanted to introduce myself and find out what are you doing here? What kind of laboratory is this? And finally, one day I walked past and the mini blinds are a little bit open and I could see there's somebody in the reception area. So I knock on the door, a man comes, opens the door, and what I say immediately is, hello, I'm Dean Radin, your neighbor. And the man who's standing there just has a shocked expression on his face and was sort of stunned. He was just standing there and not doing anything. And I thought, well, this is awkward because he doesn't look right. He looks stunned. Well, why would you look stunned? Because somebody's at the door. Finally, it turns out that he explains what is going on and why he was so stunned. Because he had spent the prior 24 hours trying to manifest me. And the story then is that he was doing a dream yoga technique where you spend 3 hours awake intending for a certain outcome, and then you go 3 hours of sleep, and you do this over a 24-hour cycle, and it doesn't take long before you get into a very weird altered state, which is the point. So he was trying to manifest me because he was doing psi research like we were doing with his company, PsyQuest, which is a business for psychic research business. And the laboratory was trying to develop products that he would eventually sell. And to help raise funds, he wanted me to be on his board of directors, but he had no idea where I was. I mean, even at that point, very few people knew I even lived in Silicon Valley. And he was doing this manifestation technique to try to get in contact with me. But he had no idea that I was going to open the door one day and be there, which is why he was so shocked. So then I became shocked too, because I felt that I had free will, but apparently not as free as I thought, because I showed up more or less at his bidding. Except it wasn't completely at his bidding, because after all, we needed an office, and wanted to find out, who is this person? What is the synchronicity? So that's part of the strangeness. The second part is I explained what we were doing and what our plans were. Of course, he was very excited about that. And I said, well, I've been in my office the last month and a half or so, drawing on a whiteboard on our wall about a laboratory setup that I wanted to create, which involved a certain kind of shielded room and a certain reclining chair and various kinds of equipment. And his eyes started bugging out, and I said, well, do you want to see what I have in my laboratory? Yes. Go around the corner into a room which is adjacent to the wall where my office was, which has the shielded room and the special chair and the physiology equipment and everything that I was drawing on the board on my wall. So was I doing remote viewing on the other side of the wall, or was I manifesting what I needed but didn't have yet? This was yet another crazy synchronicity. And also, it kind of suggests also in retrospect that if you want to create something that would be useful in a pragmatic sense so that you can get investors to pay for it, what it amounts to is something like the power of affirmations, the power of intention, really does work, but it works a whole lot better if you have two people who are kind of revolving around each other and working on similar things. And now in his case, he was using a dream yoga technique, which pushes hard on an altered state of consciousness to have for the affirmation. In my case, I was spending a couple hours a day, at least thinking about and drawing what I wanted. But drawing, of course, as I point out in my book on magic, drawing has two meanings. One is you make a sketch of what you want. The other one is you pull it towards you. And what was happening here very much was like a gravitational pull. There are two pulls going on, very closely linked to each other, as we learned later, that actually caused us to be in proximity to each other, which is certainly a synchronicity, but it suggests more of a metaphor of something like affirmations and intention create a pull that pulls reality into together somehow.
That was great.
Yeah, I thought that was a cool, a good first video to kind of kick things off. His background with the synchronicity kind of shows you, by what he's sharing, what piques his interest, as well as just how powerful synchronicity can be.
Well, I think every human being out there has experienced synchronicity.
Absolutely.
But they might have written it off by coincidence or what have you. And now that someone like Dr. Dean Radin's talking about it and writing about it, it actually takes you back into the actual understanding that there is something here. So putting attention and intention to it, it starts to manifest and you start to see it. And you get a story like that. But he had no idea that they were going to be next door to him. And I think that's the fun of it. So it's not so much that he got his lab and the other guy got to meet Dean Radin. It was how it all came about. Mm-hmm. Like the guy was doing a meditation.
3 hours on, 3 hours off.
Yeah, 3 hours on. Dean himself was writing on a whiteboard. So they had different methods, but they were coming together into the understanding of it. And I believe, once we start to understand this as a scientific awareness, I think this is where wars and disagreement arguments will end. And people, the point I'm going to make here is, often in the past, the reason wars and arguments start, which create the war, is because I need something done, so I have to I think, this person into it. I need these people to agree with me. Where in the universe is no, there's somebody else out there or a bunch of people out there that will agree with you. They're not necessarily your neighbors in the proximity to where you live. They're not necessarily your family who live in the same house as you. It's somebody else. But if you start to forcefully push it, you create a war. So if you actually just allow this to happen, all of a sudden the right people will show up and you wouldn't have to argue or fight, because what you wanted to experience, what you wanted to manifest in this world would come about through ways that you would never understand. So that's why I believe the science that he's studying right now is very important, because it can end that type of behavior of humans trying to force things to get what they want.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I see exactly what you're saying. All I kept thinking about when I was watching this clip was, this is what we do with relationships, partnerships, as far as husband, wife, whatever, your partner, all that good stuff. We see the same type of things, as far as how people come together, manifesting their different partners, all that type of stuff. It was cool to hear it from this perspective, where this gentleman on, this SciQuest Labs wanted to specifically meet Dean Radin. And, through his, sleep yoga technique and stuff like that in this practice, we saw how the intention of that gentleman and the intention of Dean Radin, his intention, came together to create what both of them wanted. And that's what's so cool, is as we manifest, one of the things we often don't think or we don't discuss is everyone's story can play off of each other, and it can all be looped into this one big, overarching story. Dean's looking for this lab. Dean's looking, wants to find out who this company is, etc. But has no idea that he is being manifested himself by some individual that happens to be next door. And like he said, he's free will, is funny because he thought, these were things he wanted, and they were. He needed a lab space. He needed a lab, all this, but his story came together with the other gentleman's story, and together they both achieved what their intention was.
And what also this clip makes clear, anyone out there trying to find the perfect modality, I'm like, there isn't a perfect modality. One was doing affirmations, so to speak, on a whiteboard, and the other one was doing a meditation.
Yep.
So whatever affirmation, or I should say, whatever modality you're into in the moment, just do it. Do not try to find a better one, because there's a million different ways of meditating. There's a million ways to create affirmations and all that stuff. So when you actually choose a modality that's suitable in the moment in which you're in, just simply do it, because the universe wouldn't have put it there in your interest if it wasn't it. But and I used to look for the perfect one. I'm like, now I realize the one that's right in front of me is perfect. Yeah. There is no, better one. Here it is. You show one guy, again, was doing a meditation, and the other one was doing
It's funny that you say that. That's actually how I felt, when I began understanding and learning these concepts. Was I was like kind of searching for that one like next aha moment, or I still need to learn this, but that's not how this whole thing works. It's like naturally it unfolds, and then this person may say it in a certain way for you to understand this, or maybe this is more applicable for the specific journey you're on, whatever. Like you're saying, there is no one way, to this.
Right now for you personally, what modality are you practicing right now that you actually enjoy? And it doesn't necessarily, obviously you got some fruit from it, but if you're still working, it means obviously I plant the seed, I just walk away from it. I don't keep digging it up saying, where's the fruit? Yeah. But what are you enjoying right now? What type of stuff are you enjoying?
So I guess one of the biggest things that this year that hasn't been as big of a deal for me in previous years has been my focus on breath work. Right. The in-breath, the out-breath, focus on the breathing. I feel like that's how you're able to learn to control your attention. So your attention is so important. Where you put your attention is where you will see things grow. And so whether, that's on something you deem good or you deem bad.
Yeah. So for you, it's the breath work.
It is.
And so you've seen experiences with that?
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it allows me to drop into this state where I can then, meditate. Meditation's been a big thing. But I'm also a big believer in affirmations too.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think affirmations are a natural byproduct, because whether you write them down or they're going in your head, you're asking for stuff all the time. A lot of times, I found this in the past with me, and people are like, well, how come it doesn't work as much? I'm like, well, from my self-experience, because I can only, unless I talk to somebody else, and then I'm even just speculating on what they think, a lot of the stuff that ran in my head is what I didn't want, right? So when I learned to say, okay, what I don't want, well, okay, what's the opposite of what I don't want in a sense? So go that way. Instead of talking about east, if you want west, just talk about west. And all of a sudden, you notice a smoother ride. So whenever I realize, okay, I don't want this, if you find I'm like, I don't want this, well, what then do you want? So when you focus on what you want, there seems to be this rush of energy, or this opening, this peaceful place where you move towards it. And all of a sudden, things start to open up. No matter what the modality is, you start to see that. But I think in the past, I'm saying this from my experience, I'm like, I don't like this, I don't like that. And what I've come to learn is, I even ask the question when I'm saying I don't like this. Now I don't quick to run towards the opposite. I'm like, well, why don't I like this? And it's interesting, because then the whole world opens up to you. Why don't I like this? I'm like, well, why did this enter into my field? Because a minute ago I was feeling good, and how did this thing I didn't want to show up if I was feeling good? This destroys the whole idea of, what do you call it, law of attraction. I'm like, I wasn't feeling bad, so how did this turn up? I'm like, well, maybe it's an old definition of this ought not to happen. And that's really what I'm finding out. So I'm no longer trying to make a U-turn from going east. I'm like, okay, why am I drawing east right now? what's wrong with East?
Well,
we live on a round planet. Doesn't really matter.
It's funny. I was talking to Kayla last night, and we were just kind of discussing about how thoughts, we think that like thoughts that we have are our thoughts, and we're the only ones thinking them. But in reality, the thoughts are like you're sitting there with like a tuner on a radio, and you're just going, and then you get to a station finally, and something starts, is audibly, you can understand it. That's like you saying, oh, that's my thought. I had that. When in reality, it's more just your brain, where you're in tune or where you're at, is picking up on it. And so we kind of identify and personalize these as our thoughts, rather than seeing it more as like this hive mind, which, thoughts can be tuned into. And like Frank was just saying, we have the ability to choose or put our intention or our attention on something. That's how we kind of shine the spotlight on where we want to go. But we're all running around saying, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, acting as if the thought that happened to come in on that radio frequency was ours, and therefore we own it, we have to acknowledge it, we have to think about it, when we, in reality, we can just let go of it and realize, oh, that's not one of my thoughts.
Yeah, but what we do own is the definition of it.
Yeah.
So when something's happening and someone says, I don't like this, well, you have to ask yourself, why don't you like it? I'm not saying you have to go down that direction, but until you get to that point, where'd that thought come from? Because a moment ago I was feeling good. And so did I dip? Or is this thought moving me in a quicker direction to get to where I want to go, in a place of synchronicity to happen? Or if I keep fighting it might take me 5 years, just theoretically speaking. All of a sudden, I'm taking out all these other avenues that can drive, because I have this solidified definition in my head that's just allowing me to go the quicker route, because all energy moves in path of least resistance. So one of the things I ask myself is like, why don't I like this? Because I was in that high-flying place and it showed up. Well, it showed up, again, someone like Dean Radin is going to find this out. He might already did. I haven't personally asked him a question. It showed up because that will take you in the path of least resistance to where you want to go. Like, he had the idea of walking the long way to work one day.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Well, in this case, walking the long way to work was the path of least resistance for him. Because logically, the path of least resistance would have went the way he went. And if he did that for the next 5 years, he would never run into this guy.
Yep.
So but something happened where it's, let me walk a different way. Like an idea came to him. I believe that we have this connection to a higher self that's saying, all right, and maybe it's not like, okay, Frank's not doing the job, I got to kick him. It's like, oh, okay, why didn't my higher self say this yesterday? I'm like, because Frank wasn't ready, perhaps.
But honestly, it is something like that.
I'm surprised my higher self even talks to me anymore. Frank's never ready.
Higher self is going nowhere.
Yeah, my higher self is like Bugs Bunny with the carrot. So what are you up to doing? What are you doing?
What are you up to?
I'm up to Whirly Wabbit. Yeah.
Seriously, though.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Let's play this next clip.
Okay, so how does all this work? Well, the truth is that nobody knows how it works, but I have a guess as to how it works. So in order to understand how anything works, we're talking about the worldview that you're looking at. So we're talking about the scientific worldview. What is that? It's materialism. So these are some of the phrases that are used in talking about these sort of things. You are a machine made of meat. Your sense of self is an illusion generated by your brain. These are standard neuroscience. And it comes about because the scientific worldview is essentially this. It's a hierarchy of different disciplines where physics is assumed to be at the bottom. Matter and energy is fundamental. And from that emerges what we know as chemistry, and then biology and psychology. And somehow consciousness, which you can think of as your sense of awareness, self-awareness, awareness in general, it emerges out of all of this. So this means that consciousness has to be composed in some way of organizations of matter and energy. It's being produced by the brain. From this perspective, ideas about manifestation, these are impossible, because how would something going on in your consciousness not only affect everything going down on this hierarchy? We know psychology and consciousness are related, and biology too, but chemistry and physics, maybe within your body, but what about outside of your body, right? An affirmation about something in the world, this is impossible. So that means that given that there's a fair amount of evidence that somehow consciousness is able to do this, and there's something missing about the idea of materialism. So it is a very popular thing because materialism is very effective. It's been extremely effective in bringing us out of medieval times into the way that we understand the world today. So we cannot throw it away. But something's missing, because we also know that these other phenomena, affirmations and psychic phenomena, they're real. So one way that I've looked at this is to go back in history to find other worldviews, because the scientific worldview is quite good, but it's only been around about 400 years. So what about 10,000 years? Well, it's shamanism. And then more formalized ways of thinking about the esoteric worldviews in Hermeticism and Neoplatonism, the Kabbalah, alchemy, Gnosticism, and from the East, yoga, the Vedas, Buddhism, and so on. So one of the early synthesis of these kinds of different philosophies was the perennial philosophy by Aldous Huxley. And he basically said it's this: it's consciousness is fundamental. And the philosopher would say this is the idea of idealism, that consciousness is fundamental, which means more fundamental than the physical world. So we go back to our hierarchy for idealism, and we just do one thing. We change where we think consciousness comes from. And in this view, things like psychic phenomena and manifestation and all the magic, they're easy to understand. And it also then allows us to understand that materialism is a special case of the world at large. So physics, chemistry, biology, and psychology are not going to change. These are all perfectly good. Neuroscience is too, but it's not the whole thing. It's a piece of the whole, which is what science has been doing from the very beginning. It comes up with an idea about how things work, and then it expands a little bit. We saw that, oh, classical physics is actually a subset of quantum mechanics and relativity. And so this is not a radical proposal. It simply says that something about awareness is primordial, it's fundamental, and from it emerges the world as we experience it. That being the case, then your consciousness is primary over physics. It's over ideas of space and time, it's over energy, it's over matter. It can make things happen as a result. And this one is then pointing out again about the special case idea. So here's classical physics. Lots of things have been learned in it. Lots of our world is based on it. But relativity is quite different. So this is the world of the world of the everyday. Relativity is the world of the very large, high gravity. Quantum mechanics, again, is very different. In fact, we still don't know how to stick quantum physics and relativity together, which is why the domains are quite separate. But this is the world of the microscopic, super cold, and several other things. And then we have philosophy, which is trying to get a handle on how do we understand these things from a fundamental set of assumptions. Huge chasm of ignorance, things that we don't know about yet, like what's dark matter, and the future. There's dark energy, dark matter, quantum gravity, lots and lots of other things. So as science advances, it keeps saying that what we used to think was fundamental, like classical physics, really isn't. The moment you start stepping out in other domains, it gets stranger and stranger. And now we see that at the leading edge of science, both in physics, mechanics, and mathematics, and in the neurosciences, we're getting thought leaders saying things that would have been thought crazy 30 years ago. Namely, as Christoph Koch says, a famous neuroscientist, I believe that consciousness is a fundamental and elementary property of living matter. It can't be derived from anything else. Well, these are now, you're seeing these as mainstream books, many of them being published by academic presses. So this is now an idea that, which has been said by the esoteric traditions for many years. Consciousness seems to be fundamental. And if that is true, then suddenly ideas like your affirmations or consciousness imposing itself onto the world, making the world change, as in destiny engineering, it's still not seen as something that's going to happen all the time to everyone willy-nilly, but it is a plausible way of thinking about what's actually happening.
Yeah, it was really good.
Well, I love that clip because he kind of ties it all together. We growing up were taught that we live in this material world, that materialism is fundamental. You know, everything is separate from us, etc. Like he was saying, we have this body, this meat suit that, you know, is separate from everything outside of us. And then to see him do it against idealism, you know, which totally flips the script on, hey, you know, it's not just physics, you know, and then everything works its way up. It's more consciousness, and then everything works its way up from there. That kind of is at the essence of what we're talking about, which is this sense of awareness, this consciousness can physically affect matter. And we know this, and we've proven this, and we've seen this replicated in labs and, you know, in different experiments like he's talking about. So then we know that materialism can't be the only way because we have proven that. We have scientifically replicated that. So that means there's another way. And then that's where he brings up, okay, well, now if we put consciousness as the fundamental, you know, baseline for this experience, that's when everything makes sense. And it's like, okay, it can be this or that. It's this and that. What he's saying is that we don't throw materialism out the window and say, oh, this material world is, you know, just fake. Well, no. Yeah, I mean, you can get stabbed and die in this material world. I mean, clearly it's not fake. Is it an illusion? Absolutely. But that's based on science showing us that we are vibrating, you know, air, if you will. You know, when you break down what we are, it's a whole lot of space in between us. And so hearing the way Dean meshed these two together was a great eye-opener for me, because it made me kind of see and realize that consciousness is fundamental.
It is. Well, nothing can contain without outside of consciousness. So is consciousness part of the pyramid, or actually the pyramid lays within consciousness? So
I think the pyramid lays within consciousness.
Yeah, so it wouldn't even be the base, because the pyramid itself is a structure. So that's what it is. So how does someone get down to the definition of consciousness? Well, it's just awareness. Mm-hmm. And that is aware, can't really be aware of itself. And that's why. So you look at the outside world, as we start to, have to define what's an illusion. So what is an illusion? Illusion is something that doesn't stay.
Something fleeting?
Yeah, exactly. Something fleeting. So something doesn't maintain and sustain. Everything in the physical world is always fleeting. But that witnesses it never changes. And so don't just take my word for it. Anyone listening right now, think about a moment in your life, you know, when you were in high school and where you are now. What understood that? What was witnessing it? That is here now and will forever be here. It never changes. And it's always experiencing everything and witnessing experience. But the experience itself is always fleeting. So one of the ways I look at it from that standpoint is, I remember as a kid, I just like to lay on the ground and look up at the sky, especially in the summertime. It was too cold in winter. But and you would just fixate straight ahead of you. And all of a sudden you see a cloud. And then you're like, hey, check out that cloud. It looks like a shark. And then, like, you know, sometime later, the shark dissipates and moves into something else. And another cloud comes in. And this goes day in and day out, all day long. But what's the one thing that never changed?
The witness.
Was the sky. So, and I'm using this metaphorically, the sky, what's what allowed the cloud to come in. So consciousness in this case would be the metaphoric understanding of the sky. It never changed. The clouds came in, and the clouds painted over the sky, but the sky itself would always remain in. So without the sky, there would be no clouds. But without any clouds, you still have the sky. But what's the purpose of the sky without clouds? So that's why the material world is important to the experience. So the experience is the reality. It's real. Like getting stabbed is real. But yet, you know, you'll die. Your physical body will either heal or come back. And anyone that's ever been stabbed that is around to talk about it, well, then they're not continuously getting stabbed.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then they transform into some other energy. And these are things that, you have to do self-inquiry about. You have to look into it. Don't take our word for it. But, Dean Radin lays out a really good way of stepping out. Because if the material world really all there was, this is what creates anxiety. This is what creates all this uncomfortableness for the human psyche. But when you realize, hey, we're just watching this, and how I feel about it, I can shift and change my definition to it, like I spoke about earlier. And then I can actually see the outside world. It doesn't look as bad. Even though that cloud still looks like a shark, it no longer scares me. Did I create the shark cloud or no? It's like I just enjoyed it. And then the beauty about looking up at the sky at clouds is I wasn't thinking, I was just observing. And that's a beautiful moment. See, everything from meditation to all these different modalities gets us to slow down the aspect of thinking and just go back into this nice state where we fall below it and we actually watch things happen like miracles.
We're observing.
Yeah.
See, I love that. One of my favorite parts about this clip too was how Dr. Dean Radin mentioned science has been around for 400 years.
Well, the way we know science.
Oh yeah.
Because Ayurvedic, that's been about 5,000 years.
Well, that's what I'm kind of getting at, is exactly that. Why would we, why do we take something that's, 400 some years old, the science that we call science, and claim this to be the end all be all? Because there's so many people out there who are like, oh, I only believe in science. Science is the truth, etc. All this, if it can't be measured, it's not real. Well, for thousands of years, people were living, surviving, getting healthy, experiencing this whole world. So to say that, they were uncivilized or they were uneducated, it's just so ridiculous to think about. And so I sit there and I'm like, wow, we've got 400 years of evidence on something, and we call it, we take it to be complete and total fact without any, or it could be this way, In fact, we're kind of taught that if you go against what science says, you could be wrong. Well, that makes me believe, like, okay, well, what if, 30 years ago, I was talking to my science teacher and I told him, hey, Pluto's not a planet. And he's like, what are you talking about? Of course it's a planet. Well, here we are today. Pluto's not a planet.
Yeah, but it's not a planet because someone said so. This is still the material world.
But
we're talking about but I'm saying it's just the way someone defined planet. That's what it is.
Yeah.
What we're really getting to the crux of is the understanding of how do you define science and where you look at science, because, and I get why people are skeptical because back in the day, it's like everyone's talking about, well, the human body theoretically can levitate, but no one on the planet's levitating. So yeah, why would you believe that? I'm like, how can you believe someone's levitating if you've never seen it? I get that. So, you ever see a human being fly? No. Well, the science in this field says it's possible. I'm like, well, until you can show me, I'm not jumping off a cliff anytime soon. So that's why we were here. That's why we're at this place. I get it. But once you can prove somebody's flying, everyone buys into it. So that is the job of science. Now, there are these mystics that come along and say this, and they can do it. And there's stories about people that actually have levitated. Mm-hmm. And so it opens up what else is going on. And what it comes down to, it's the collective consciousness that keeps us in this realm of what to believe and what not to believe. The trick is, if you want to believe outside the collective consciousness, you could have to leave the collective consciousness alone, because people are trying to fight against it. So I'm not here to say oh, what do we know? What do we know? Because if I say, what do we know? I'm stuck in that collective consciousness. So I have to step outside of that in order to prove something. We're a loving setting. So if you want to prove something, stop trying to disprove something. Just prove it. And and you could say that's your burden or that's your gift. So, and then when you do, because think about how many people came up with the idea of the cell phone. A handful of engineers, I don't know the history behind it, but now everyone knows the cell phones exist. But if they had to get everyone to believe them, it would still be, I would still have that coil thing in my kitchen at a wrap. I would still be on that. Thank God when you get these scientists and Dean Radin is able to communicate because of technology more. But to knock somebody else for what they're doing, I'm like, it doesn't really help at all, because we're all doing the best we can. But if I do knock and say, if you understood this, all of a sudden I'm taking my attention off of the prize, and it's slowing me down. And it's well, it would have worked, but no one believed in it. I'm like, every great story, no one believed in it until they saw it, and like, all right, there you go. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, science, when people say, well, no one believes in it, I'm like, well, that's your advantage. That becomes your vantage point, because you can open up eyes to a completely different thing, get to the ground floor if that's what you want to do. Because once everyone's talking about it, it's no longer magic. But don't force other people to, like, oh, if everyone just knew this, life would be easier. I'm like, no, because, the cell phone didn't wipe out, it wiped out a couple things, but it didn't wipe out, suffering.
No.
For some people, they suffer more, because now, like, you hear about kids getting bullied. And, when I was a kid, I got bullied. It was, either before school or after school, but not, or, I could escape it. And certainly on the weekends, I didn't see the bully. You got a cell phone, you can wake up to being bullied. Like, literally in your bed, you look at your phone like, shit, you can't get away from it. What were they saying about me last night? So, did it wipe that out? No. It made it easy for me to find the location on the planet. Yeah. But really, it's consciousness, the awareness of stuff, of who we are. And consciousness is love. We come from that place. You learn not to judge that. Everyone's doing the best they can. And if you're right about this, well, then show us you're right about this. So, it's all about self-inquiry in that sense. That's what scientists does, to take it upon themselves. And he even started out a clip where we don't know. We don't know. But let's go a little bit deeper here.
Well, as soon as we say we know something, that's when we're breaking it down, and that's when we're making it into something. Mm-hmm. Because that's how kind of this whole, double slit experiment, mind matter all works. There's a potential of anything. And then as soon as our intention, our attention is put on something, we make it into something. This is why we make our problems a big deal. It could just be, oh, yeah, that could happen. But then we begin to focus on it. We begin to give it our attention. And then we bring it to life. And then we experience it. And we say, oh, why is this happening to me? Yeah. And it's us creating it into matter, into an experience. Hence, consciousness is fundamental.
Yeah, and that's what we do know is we're observing something through a conscious, whatever, how you define consciousness. But we know, this is what we do know. We are observing something. We are experiencing something. But the thing itself is always fleeting. So we don't know. We can have an experience with it, but it's always fleeting. Even if I got stabbed in the arm and the pain was there, well, eventually the pain would subside and be gone.
The weird thing is, what we're all trying to play along is we act like there's one absolute underlying reality.
Well, we've been looking for that, and it is. It's called
love,
mentalism. Well, yeah, love is the energy that allows all the physical stuff to become in. So there is no opposite of love in the way I define it. There's just different degrees of it. Yeah. So when you take again, I mentioned this before. So if you take 80 degrees, which is very suitable for the human condition, and then you took, let's just say -10. Now, was -10 the opposite of 80 degrees? Mm-hmm. No, it's just a different degree of temperature. That's all it is. So there is no opposite in temperature. There's different degrees of it. Now, from the human condition in the physical realm, 80 degrees is suitable. -10, not so much in the way we understand it. So unless you're Wim Hof.
Yeah, seriously.
The guy, but hey, so when people are always thinking of opposites, this or that, and this, we don't live in, we play this game that we live in a duality world, but it's actually non-duality in a sense, but we're actually experiencing the attachment and connection to everything. Because if I'm experiencing it, I am connected to it. If I become one with it. And then the question is, was it the chicken or the egg? I'm like, well, first it was consciousness. Chicken and egg is still two objects, and you can go down that rabbit hole if you like, but you know, that's kind of how. Yeah, and again, I'm still learning. I don't claim to know anything. I claim to know very little actually, other than I'm having an experience, and I've always had an experience. I've never not had an experience. Some good, some bad, but then I'm like, why was that bad? And I start to soften up my definition of it, and hey, I still have ones that I avoid and stay away from. That's smart, but you know, if I can get close enough to that snake and realize it was just a rope, the fear goes away. In the parable of the snake,
I like that one.
But if I run from it, I'm always going to think it's a snake, and I can avoid that area, but I have to get my bicycle. It's in that shed, and there's a snake out front. Then one day you grow the balls to go up to it, and you realize you still live. It's a freaking rope. I could have been riding my bike a week ago, you know? And that's why we laugh. That's why laughter is a great thing, because a lot of what we are faced with is laughter. It's funny because it's like we're being punked every moment of the time because we think we know, we don't. But face the thing that fear comes into fear, and you realize it's not that big of a deal. And that's exactly what Dean Radin and his science is studying when it comes to materialistic, psychological, chemical, and biological. It's all in the physical realm, just like water has 3 different values to it, right? It's a solid, a liquid, and it's a gas. But it's water. But what knows that is consciousness. But I can have different degrees of it, right? And that's kind of how it is. So like physical, psychological, biological, chemical, different degrees of this physical world, how we explain it.
Yeah. Let's jump into this next clip.
All right.
If we focus on, for instance, the news and something we don't want too much, where we're so worried that it's going to happen, is that in a sense resonance, but not in the direction that we desire?
A case can be made, yes, that what you attend to, you draw to you, whether you like it or not. So I don't know, I'm trying to think if there are any experiments that have been done along those lines. I guess the closest that we can see are in cases with random number generators, for example. Some people will systematically get results that are opposite to what their intention is.
Yeah.
And you see this more or less across the board in many different kinds of psi tests where people get psi missing. Mm-hmm. So rather than getting the result that they're aiming for, they get the exact opposite result, but not just by chance, but significantly opposite. So the way that this is often described is that unconsciously, you actually don't want what you're wishing for. Because these kinds of phenomena all are bubbling up from the unconscious. Yeah. And so you may consciously want this, but unconsciously you get defeated. You defeat yourself. And of course, it being an unconscious override, you by definition don't have control over it. It is an unconscious thing. And we don't need psychotherapy and neuroscience to tell us that we're always being pushed by our unconscious. All we need to do is look at how people eat and how much we are influenced by advertising to see that your unconscious is overriding most of your conscious wishes.
This is going to get into a whole other area. Forgive me. It goes back maybe to global coherence, but I see humanity. I see us each as cells, as part of the organism, part of the whole of what I call the human beingness. Or another basic way to describe it is a bush with individual rose flowers on it. We're each a rose on the bush. But I see with what's going on in the world today that there is maybe some coherence, but there also is, we are very much bringing about what we don't desire because there is a subconscious ebb and flow going on in the human beingness. In this one human being, we have a subconscious that we have to deal with right now.
Right, on an individual basis and on a societal basis and on a global basis. It's true. Yeah, I mean, we don't normally think of a societal unconscious influence, but it's there just as much as it is in the case of an individual, probably even more powerful.
So on a positive note, what is effortlessly striving? Because when I do coaching of somebody, I'm trying to work with them to get them into a state of coherence or what I call flow. So what's effortless striving?
Effortless striving is the goal in meditation, where you must attack the practice as though it is the most important thing that you will ever do in your life, with complete effort, and yet with no striving underneath it. So it's a paradox.
Yeah.
It's the sense of absolute focus, absolute wanting something without wanting it at all. And so because it's a paradox, it sounds from a naive perspective that that's impossible. Except that after you do meditation for a while, you realize that is exactly the way that it works. You can have simultaneously an extreme desire or focus for something, but without the anxiety that usually comes along with that effort. You have both at the same time.
I like the points they brought up in this, because when we talk about the collective unconsciousness, and I see a lot of people that are doing what we're doing, and I don't have a problem with it. I try to stay away from it. And they point out what's wrong in the world. I'm like, well, if there's nothing wrong with the world, you wouldn't have a podcast.
Yeah, right.
Right. And what's wrong with the world, even like Dean brought up here, is like, well, look at the way people eat. It's in the subconscious, and be like, oh, there's something wrong with that. Well, if you go back, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago, where people wish they can get food at any moment, they created that. So really what I believe and think is happening in the subconscious isn't that it's bad, it's just that we're done with it and you have to overcome it. Because what we think is wrong now, back then they would have loved to have the ability to overeat because they were undereating, so to speak. And then, well, what are we doing now in this moment that's going to create the next level of subconscious? Because we always think we're perfect. We always think, well, how I'm thinking is better than the other people. And the truth is, you can step out, like, you know, we're all in this unified subconscious setting. We're all tied into it. But really, in order to walk through a crowd of people, you can do it, but you have to stay very focused. So focus, high focus, like Dean was talking about here, about getting into a meditation and just completely focusing is why we're here. So I kind of like the dense crowd to walk through, because if I was just walking down the street with nobody around, what focus would I need? There seems to be something in us focus. So we see something, okay, I want to turn the ship around. Well, it's easy to go in a direction, but once I start to try to turn around and it's too tough, we make up stories like, well, it's, you know, it's the way it is. My subconscious is bad. I'm like, no, it's just momentum. And if you can shift momentum, because we like to do that, how can I do it in the path of least resistance? Well, one way is stop blaming the subconscious for one. Stop blaming the world consciousness for the other. You know, Nelson Mandela didn't need the whole world to fall into a state of love. For him to fall into a state of love, he just did. Yeah. Even though he was in prison. Oh my God! If he had to wait for half the prisoners to get into a state of love for him to do that, he would still be there. So there's something about that I do know, but why does it happen? I don't know. Like, you know, maybe God, if you believe in God or this creator of this is doing this, it's like, oh, life's getting too easy. Let's put an obstacle course. Let's put it there. Okay, they got the food they wanted. Now I'm going to make them overeat. Here you go. Here's too much food. And they're like, okay, we're like this yo-yo of people. So I just look at.
Funny how that works.
Well, it is. I don't know enough to say for what we did in the past was wrong. We want to move in a different direction just because the currents are shifting, and the currents are shifting. So it's like, oh my God, you have to align yourself in that current in order to move in the path of least resistance. If not, you might get knocked off the side of the boat, you know? But yeah, with the boat's moving comfortably, you can sit on the edge. But once the airplane's landing, what do they tell you? Sit down and buckle in, because you need, this is part of it. So people are like, I don't want to buckle in. I'm like, all right, he's going to get hurt. So right now it's about buckling in. And again, if I'm sitting there buckled in and somebody isn't, if they hit their head, I don't feel it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to see anyone get hurt. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a crazy man, but if I got up to help them and I got hurt, I'm going to blame the person. Like, if you would just sat in your seat, I wouldn't have a freaking lump on my head. And I'm like, and the guy's like, no one told you to get out of your damn seat to help me, So we have to be careful of stop blaming the circumstance, the situation, the world. I'm like, I think the circumstance, situation, world are brilliant. It's why you have scientists like Dean Radin trying to figure out what the hell's going on. You know, the reason you and I have a show is because what the hell's going on? I'm like, I have no idea. But it's fun.
And that's the fun part.
It's fun, yeah.
Let's try to explain it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the point. I chose this video for 2 reasons. So first, I love that he came out and he just throws that out there. Hey, so like with the news, you know, this information, you know, gets kind of thrown out or planted out there. And then we all take this, you know, it's planted in our subconscious. And then from there, you know, we dream it into reality. And I've seen this happen my entire life. I look back at, you know, these different moments in history, things, you know, just how, you know, the news has said, oh, this is the way things are. And then people pick those things up and say, this is the way things are. And then they become that way. And so I just love that that was like a question that he initially just kind of threw out there in the beginning of this clip. But it's important for us to realize that a lot of our ideas aren't our ideas, number one, but a lot of them are just things that we have been told this is the way life is, or this is how this works. And then we just operate by them rather than saying, hey, wait, there's got to be a different way. So that was something I really liked, you know. But here at the end, the effortless striving, I know exactly what he's talking about. And that is the flow state that we're all looking for. It's this knowing, it's this intent, you know, I want to accomplish this, or I will accomplish this, whatever. And mixed with being okay that if it doesn't happen, or it's happening in, you know, its perfect time. It's kind of this, I don't want to say half in, half out. It's more like a it's a knowing with allowing everything to unfold just like it needs to. But there's a deep underlying knowing that, you know, you will achieve, or you will succeed, or you will, I don't know. I don't really want to make it seem like it's something that you have to obtain, because there's nothing you have to obtain. It's more like it's right there and you just access it.
Yeah, go to the fundamental understanding of like why you want that.
Well, I mean,
why do you want the thing to achieve?
I guess
because you think in having it. Well, you think in having it will make you feel better.
Yeah.
So when you get into the meditative state, you're already feeling better. So you get to the point where you really don't care about it. Michael Singer talks about this, and you know, to some degree, if you want to prove this, do it. You know, he wrote the Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
And when you look at and again, Michael Singer did not invent this. You know, this stuff's been around for millennia. But when you actually just go, it's like going into a movie. Right? You know, to some degree, I believe we're born into the situation, circumstance that we ask for. Right? Mm-hmm. So I'm an actor. I signed up for this role, but people are like, well, how come if I signed up for it and I don't have a memory of it? I'm like, well, no actor has a memory of the role. They haven't played it yet. You know, they might have an idea what the role is going to be, but until they get on the set, they have no memory of it. So it's like I go into a movie. I choose the setting of the movie, whether it's a comedy, drama, whatever, and I relinquish up all rights to what's going to happen, but yet I enjoy it. Why do you want it to happen this way? You can only want something to happen a certain way if you already experienced it. If you're experienced, why do you want it to happen again? That's called Groundhog's Day. Why, like, so everyone thinks it should happen this way. If the world would just do this, like, what are you doing? Well, I can't. I want it to be this way. Why? That's how dictators start. You have spiritual dictators out there. They're called, cult leaders. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I could see how we could fall into that. I do. Because if people just knew what I knew, I'm like, well, you want people to do what you want to do, so you're selling them something. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, I don't know enough to do that. I like to interact with people, but you get over the aspect of desiring, or not desiring, but moving towards something. I'm like, are we moving towards something, or is it moving towards us? Or we're in it? Because I'm just aware of it. So you start to, okay, I can direct this thing. Well, what I can direct about the movie is how I feel about it. But the movie's made. I read the book. I can direct my attention towards the book differently, but the author already had written the book. So my way of looking at it, the way I read it, the way I bring my experiences to it, or non-experience that I had, I'm like, wow, I've never experienced that before, what the author had written. and open up to that, you know? Because I've read books in the past where I didn't care for, and then years later picked it up, like, wow, it was an amazing book. And I realized, how come I didn't get that in the past? Well, I was in a different place, you know? And it's very interesting. Was I in a worse place before? No, I wasn't.
You were right where you needed to be.
Yeah, I was in a different river, and I was trying to jump into another river because somebody told me I had to read the book. So I read it. Maybe that's why I didn't like it, because someone told me I had to. I'm a stubborn young lad. Well, I'm no longer young, but...
But that's kind of exactly what they're getting at, you know, which is ultimately we're all running around like that.
Yeah, until we realize we don't need to. And then you get into that flow state. And then if you're in the flow state, the news won't bother you. The politician, whoever's president, will not bother you. You act accordingly. Yes, you have to do things different because this person is president or running. If there's a war going on, yes, you have to act accordingly. I'm not saying you bury your head in the sand. But we become more responsive when we get into this flow state. And people that are responsive can deal with anything that's put in front of them. Like that saying was like, God doesn't give you what you can't handle. But you have to get to the place of being responsible. When you become responsive, like stop trying to, this should not be happening. Well, that's not real responsive. That's negating and pushing away. Reacting, yes, thank you. And once we do that, get more responsive, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is interesting. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You ever think like if a Navy SEAL, like they're trained to go in and into tight situations and it extract something or get rid of somebody, you think they want life to be easy? No. If you want life to be easy, go live in a monastery. But to a Navy SEAL, that'd be difficult as hell. And for the person living in a monastery, being a Navy SEAL would be freaking hellish, right? One isn't better than the other. Leave the other one alone and go do your thing. And then talk about it, because you might encourage someone that might want to go into the monastery. You might encourage someone that might want to go into the Navy SEAL. Who knows? But these are just different fractions of different experiences that all consciousness accepts. Just like the sky accepts every damn cloud that it comes. We're the ones who's like, I don't like that one. And I'm not saying don't have any, have discernment. Like, don't take in everything, because your subconscious won't allow you, like Dean was saying.
But we've taken like that idea and we've applied it everywhere, and we've normalized it. So people sit there and they're like, oh, I don't like this person because this is what they do. They're lazy, or they're this, or they're that. They're an underachiever. They're that. And we categorize them, you know, and then we start making things about what we do like and what are acceptable, you know, to us.
I like lazy people, so when I go to the gym, it looks like I'm working hard.
But you see what I mean? We are our own worst enemies. What we're doing is we are categorizing, judging, labeling everything outside of us. And we're like, oh, yeah, that's not for me. I don't like this. And then we define what is perfect or what, you know, is acceptable. And that anything outside of that box, you know, doesn't work. And so now we've alienated, you know, 90% of life's experiences.
Yeah. Well, at some level, I think, you know, each individual has to, you're going to alienate 95 anyway, because you can't do it all. You know, like I believe, like, just like, you say you're on a movie set and you're an actor, and they say there's like, you know, 5 main characters in it. Well, let's just make it easy for mathematics. So there's four main characters, right, in the show, and I can only represent 25% of that movie from the character standpoint. So that means I'm negating 75% of the other. I'm interacting with it, but I can't take on everyone's role. It'd be ridiculous, you know, unless you're Richard Little, who used to do movies where he did every single character.
That's funny.
Or Dana Carvey, where he
Yeah,
could do all the characters. Yeah, but even then, he had to subsection his mind and get into a different character in order to fulfill the plot of the story and or to make it interesting. Because otherwise, the world we live in would be very flat. But most people I say most people, I'm like, I used to think, like, why is that person doing that? They ought not to be doing that. And why? Because I can't do that.
Often that
maybe because I wish I could. And why do I wish I could? Because I don't know.
Case.
Maybe somebody told me I should be doing that, and I realized when I find myself in this night, not even blissful place, this very subdued place, I'm like, there's nothing else I want. But what's funny is I'm encouraged to do stuff, and I go do it. So it like, when I'm feeling good, it never encouraged me to necessarily go back to sleep and do nothing, like retire from life. Quite the opposite. And then I'm like, why do I want to do this? I'm like, I don't know, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, when you're a kid, why'd you do that? Because I felt like it. Now, when you're